Hello, everyone, and welcome to Employing and Supporting Neurodiverse Professionals, our final session of today's third day of William Mary's third annual Professionals Week. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks for William Mary, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session. Throughout this week, an emerging theme has been the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in supporting individuals and organizations to thrive. Today, we are taking a deeper dive into D&I and shared best practices and how to create and cultivate a more inclusive workplace. Thank you for joining us. It is now my great pleasure to turn over to invite my colleague, Karin Wulf, to help kick off this session and moderate our esteemed panel. Karin is Professor of History and Director of the Omohundro Institute here at William Mary. Karin earned her PhD from Johns Hopkins University in 1993. Before coming to William Mary, she also taught for 10 years at American University. Most relevant to today's conversation, Karin is our co-chair of William Mary's Neurodiversity Working Group and has really helped to lead our community on addressing the neurodiversity initiatives here at William & Mary. Without further ado, Karin, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Michael. Can you just give me a thumbs up and let me know that I am truly off mute? There is nothing like having a virtual event where you start off with a great deal of enthusiasm and then everyone says, so delightful to see all of you. And thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to tell you just a little bit about William & Mary's Neurodiversity Initiative. It's a really distinctive project, now celebrating our 9th year. This is a fully cross-campus project with faculty, staff, students, administrators, alums, and community members joining in. The Neurodiversity Initiative at William & Mary has two main goals. The first is to help on our own campus and then beyond recognize brain differences as an important form of diversity that contributes to our community in the way that all forms of diversity are so important and enriching. And secondly, to help support our neurodiverse students and staff. We have developed programming on campus for both goals, a better understanding of neurodiversity, and support. And a group of us, including myself and John Robison, who I'll introduce in a moment, teach a course on campus every year. In fact, we're right in the middle of it right now, every Monday, and in our DC office about neurodiversity. We also host informational programs in departments and offices all over campus to help faculty and staff build more inclusive classrooms and other campus spaces. We work with the Office of Student Services and the Assistant Dean to help bring specific supports to students. And we've worked with the Counseling Center, Residential Life, the Dining Hall, so many different areas on campus. And most importantly, we have an absolutely tremendous student group. About 5 years ago, we launched a specific summer welcome weekend for incoming neurodiverse students, and it was a terrific success. And I would be remiss if I didn't say how grateful we are to the Parents Fund for their generous support of that program. So that's a super brief summary of a wide-ranging, very William & Mary project, student-centered, but with ambitions of wider service. Now let me turn to the real thing here, which is our speakers today. It is absolutely a pleasure to introduce first Janet Atwater, who is a William & Mary BA, as well as an RPI MBA. Janet is the Executive Director for the Precision Institute, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to assessing and training individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities to enable them to be employed in technology and business services positions. Janet has 30+ years of experience in training and development and 25+ years in nonprofit leadership and management. And her multifaceted career, it's really quite amazing to read about, encompasses performing arts, higher education, leadership development, and nonprofit management. Janet has served on numerous nonprofit boards, and she currently serves in leadership positions on 2 boards at William & Mary. John Elder Robison is a true polymath, probably best known as the New York Times bestselling author of Look Me in the Eye, My Life with Asperger's. Published in 2007, Look Me in the Eye has been translated into languages all over the world. John has since written 3 other books, most recently Switched On, a memoir of brain change and emotional awakening. John is an extremely talented photographer, the owner of J.E. Robison Service, a successful company servicing and restoring luxury European cars, the inventor and engineer in the 1970s for instruments and lighting for bands such as Kiss, including the famous flaming guitar. And very importantly for us, he has taken a leadership role in autism advocacy. People around the world often say that their first introduction to autism is look me in the eye. John has taken that recognition as an opportunity and an obligation. His work for autism advocacy on the Federal Interagency Coordinating Committee on Autism and with the World Health Organization, among others, has made him a vital voice in public policy. And now John has committed himself to working for neurodiversity, particularly in higher education. And since 2014, it's been our very great honor to have John as a scholar in residence at William and Mary. So with all of that introduction behind us, I'm going to kick us off by posing a question first to John. I think we're looking forward to a really wonderfully rich conversation. John, I'm going to ask you first to just talk about the real basics of what is neurodiversity. What do we mean when we say that word?
Neurodiversity is a word that is made from the terms neurological diversity. We take for granted that there are all sorts of human diversity. People are different heights, different builds. They have different skin colors. We also recognize people have different abilities. He's a fast runner, or she has a prodigious memory. But it's only recently that we have become aware that there are different ways of thinking. And we became aware of different ways of thinking through a medical lens at first, recognizing that some people had brains that were so different, they were seriously disabled. But as we began to explore that in the fields of psychology, psychiatry, and other medical disciplines, we began to realize that the spectrum of human neurological diversity is a very broad one. And at the same time, people like me who grew up with diagnoses of cognitive disabilities like autism, that's a cognitive disability, we began to speak out saying that we were more than just a collection of disabilities. And indeed, we now realize that our different ways of thinking provide a key counterpoint to the more mainstream ways of thinking. There is no single neurological difference among people like me that makes us necessary for our species, but it is the breadth of diversity, the differences in people like us, that is so important to driving our species forward. And that is a very strongly positive attribute that we are only just now discovering, because someone who thinks differently and sees the world different is not as obvious as someone who is, for example, exceptionally strong or who is exceptionally tall.
John, can I just ask, I'm going to ask you a quick follow-up before we turn to Janet and give her a chance to just chime in on this same subject, which is you touched on the history of this concept, or the history of our understanding of neurological difference. And I wondered if you could just expand on that for a minute or two, because obviously there are, when you talk about neurology, you're talking about brain structures. Sorry about my dog there. And he's going to keep barking. But there's also a history of our understanding of how these differences are instantiated. So I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, in the 19th century, when the field of psychology and psychiatry, when those fields were just emerging, there was an early recognition that some psychological problems adults experienced might have been the result of childhood trauma. The best example of that would be the thinkings of Freud and that community. But there was always a large or a significant population of people who were different from birth. They did not become different after a trauma. And and there were two schools of thought as to why these differences came about. And it's important to recognize that few, if any, leading what we would call psychiatrists, but they had various names in the 19th century, few of those people were atheists. They were almost without exception devoutly religious. And there were some who followed a Catholic school of thought, which was that this was a sin and a chosen behavior. The autistic or the ADHD behavior was a chosen bad behavior. The Jewish practitioners tended to have an interpretation that was more along the lines of God just made them that way. They're all God's creatures. And that didn't seem to mean much until we got into the years that led to World War II. By that time, there were two strong schools of thought in Europe. One was this original sin idea that Catholic psychiatrists embraced. The other being God made them different. That was the Jewish thought. And when Nazism rose in Europe, the Jewish psychiatrists carried the idea that God made them different, and they were born that way all over the world. And that has produced a multi-generational change in how autism is understood. Autism is a difference that we are born with. It's a natural part of us in our thinking in America because Jewish refugees brought that thinking here, whereas in much of Europe until the most recent decade, autism, ADHD, and other inborn neurological differences were treated as deliberate misbehaviors. So a really, really important difference in how it's understood from the outset.
Thank you for that. I think many of us would recognize that the way that autism has been described by medical professionals has changed over time, and the kind of our understanding of how social circumstances shape our interpretation of behavior. That is, as you get a kind of 20th century norming and standardization of education, for example, expectations that everybody behave the same. And also we know that there is a lot of intersectionality here, that there are ways in which girls in contemporary times, that girls are less frequently diagnosed on the autism spectrum because of expectations that autism is a boy thing. And we also know that there is a racial dynamic to this too, that Black kids are often not diagnosed, but instead are treated, actually, interestingly, I'm not sure I want to draw this precise dichotomy to the 19th century you're talking about, but treated as if they're behavior issues. So I think that's just super important, this historical dimension. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a historian. Well, maybe I am.
Well, it's
anyway.
certainly true. It's certainly true that behavior in a young girl that is described as shy and cute in a boy is dangerous and weird. And if the boy is Black, it is not only dangerous and weird, it's aggressive too.
Yeah, and we see that.
That has that, which of course is based in institutionalized racism, has driven mistreatment of a great many neurodivergent people in recent generations. Absolutely.
Thank you. Janet, I want to pitch this to you and just ask you if you wanted to chime in on kind of what is neurodiversity as we're kind of building this idea before we get into thinking about how to support neurodiverse individuals in the workplace.
Thanks, Karin. I'd say the only thing I also wanted to add to what John was saying, because I've done a lot of reading around, because it is fascinating, was, again, prior to World War II, most families who had a neurodiverse child were really told to put them in an institution and forget they ever had them. So really just pretend, if you have 4 kids, well, no, you really didn't. You only had 3. And to just, that they would just be, quote unquote, taken care of, and to really just, again, forget you ever had that child, which is amazing to me, the difference that we've seen over the last 100 years in terms of recognizing, and to your second question then, really recognizing the special abilities versus the disability, and how much thinking differently is such, can be a gift, and really be, and to the point of what we're talking about today, really can be a huge boon to an employer and to an organization.
Thank you for that. And we're going to come right back around to this. I also just want to note for anyone, just please feel free to throw questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll be monitoring as we go along, and I'll try to incorporate some of your questions both at the end and also throughout our discussion. John, let me go back to you, and let's talk a little bit about some of the key challenges for neurodiverse individuals in educational and social settings, because I think that really does help lay the foundation for Janet to help us walk through support in professional contexts.
One thing that goes hand in hand with a neurological difference that makes us see the world differently is some level of communication disability when relating to people who don't see the world as we do. So, for example, if I cannot read your body language and I can't read your facial expressions, but I'm a reasonably smart fellow and I can see that you're smiling. I can recognize that, but I can't tell if that means you're smiling because you're fond of me or you're smiling because I just said something stupid. You might say to me, "That's great," after I just tell you something I did, and I can't tell if you're saying that's great in a sarcastic way because you're really upset or because it really is great. Now, as an adult, I don't make very many of those kinds of mistakes, but it should be easy to imagine how, as a 6-year-old boy or as a 10 or a 12-year-old, I would make those mistakes all the time. And in those formative years, those social failures contribute to feelings of isolation. They build anxiety and depression in folks who are different. And there is no single perceptual difference that lies at the cause of it. Just the fact that we see the world differently and we therefore will not respond in the expected way. And it causes folks to think we're tricky, devious, manipulative. That is, I would say, at the root, the biggest problem that we face. And you might think, well, why do we want to solve that so much in academia? And the answer is that a person who has a different way of seeing things may be able to solve a complex problem of reasoning in an instant that 10 people who don't happen to have that neurological difference have been stumped by for a long period of time. And therefore, it is worth it as a society to accommodate the different thinkers who have exceptional abilities for the benefit of society. And that means that you carry everyone. I mean, you might say that people who have the greatest cognitive ability in any society might be the stars, but you have to nurture everyone in order to have such people appear. And that's, I think, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Janet, did you want to chime in there on this question about kind of key challenges in a social or educational setting? And I also wanted to just ask if you could ask the question of, when we're talking about neurodiversity, we've mostly focused on autism, partly because it's John's experience. It's the experience that I share with my family. But when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're really talking about a wide range of neurodiverse circumstances and situations, not only autism, and they often intersect too. Can you
I see everything from, the OCD behavior, obsessive compulsive disorder behavior, ADHD behaviors. We see this again with the educational piece. To your point, I believe you said earlier, there was that routinization and structured and standardization of education where it got to the point where everyone must sit in their seat behind a desk for X amount of time. And so for somebody who says ADHD and may need to want to stand or move or fidget, that became unexceptional. and so all of a sudden it became that's a problem child, that's an issue, and then you began to see them being removed from classrooms and setting up these other situations, as opposed to recognizing that, you know, we learn differently, we need different accommodations so that we can learn. To one point, one of the things I love is that, you know, many folks with autism don't like to meet somebody in the eye. It requires a tremendous amount of energy and attention to be able to hold that gaze, which then means they really can't listen as effectively because they're focusing so much on using that ability to do that. And many will say, when we're talking to them, they'll say, well, why do I need to look at you? You're talking, I need to hear you, not look at you. And so it's things like that that I think are very much still affects the educational experience, and of course all social settings.
If I may make a point about autism in the conversation, autism, I believe, is rightly at the center of the neurodiversity conversation, because autism has a definition which encompasses all of the other inborn neurological differences. And that is why a person who is diagnosed with, say, autism at age 15 was often previously diagnosed with ADHD or OCD or dyslexia, all these other things. Those are more tightly defined behavioral subsets that all can fall under the autism umbrella. And indeed, biologically, all these conditions are very closely related. And that, I think, makes neurodiversity a very apt term to describe them, and one that is not judgmental. Autism or ADHD carries significant baggage with its negative connotations.
I couldn't agree more, John. I think the helpfulness in terms of understanding some of these sort of tangential diagnoses is when you're interacting sort of in a work setting or in an educational setting, the needs for individuals might be slightly different if they have OCD issues versus ADHD issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Those labels are very useful in tailoring services. I think it's important that people bear in mind when they follow a child through school and the diagnostic labels change, that does not mean that the previous diagnoses were wrong. It means more knowledge is appearing.
I think I just want to elevate 2 points that you have made, I think, throughout the last exchanges. And one is just the importance of making implicit things explicit, clarifying information and clarifying expectations. Often neurotypical people will make an implied kind of point and expect that someone is able to pick up on it. I think that's John's point about, if you say, oh, that was great, did you mean, that was great? Or did you mean, that was great? You know, which thing did you mean? And the importance of being explicit, taking the implicit to explicit. And the second thing I just want to underscore there is the point that both of you have made implicitly. No disrespect there to that, implicit, but about expectations of neurotypical people and how much the experience of neurodiverse people is shaped by the expectations of neurotypical people. So Janet, your point about looking someone in the eye, and the expectation of a neurotypical person that if someone's looking them in the eye, then they're really paying attention. Where in fact, for a neurodiverse person, it can be the exact opposite. If you force me to look in the eye, then I can't really pay attention. I think that's so interesting. So let's turn now to some of the meat of this conversation today. And Janet, I'm going to ask you, I think you have some slides to share with us. But
I do. Michael, you'll throw up, I think, slide number 4.
Great. So we're just talking about some of the key challenges of neurodiverse individuals in employment. And employment
So
settings.
I'll kick it off, and I'm sure John's got some things he'll want to say as well. I threw in a quote from a young man that I've worked with for a number of years. This is Matt, and after he got his degrees, I couldn't land a job, and in 4 years of job searching, only had one interview. He sent out hundreds of resumes. He made countless, and phone calls are very, very difficult for people with autism. That interchange over the phone, did that as well. Had several degrees, I mean, but could not get a job. The CDC believes that there's approximately 5.4 million adults in the United States with autism spectrum disorder. 75 to 80% of those individuals are either unemployed or underemployed, meaning that they are doing work that is below their capabilities. And a lot of that is the barriers and biases leading to underutilization of skills and abilities. And John and I both sort of touched on some of those things, but a lot of it comes down to that difficulty in navigating the traditional job interview, that meeting the eye, the shaking of the hand. Of course, that shaking hands was back when we were pre-COVID. But that whole sense of the inability to sell yourself and how you come across as this confident and also answering some of those really, really strange questions that you might get asked in terms of tell me about a time where you failed and how you overcame that failure. And people on the spectrum, that's a very, very difficult concept to try to get around. Tend to be very literal. And so a conversational back and forth really puts them at a profound disadvantage. And so if you proceed to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more of that. But at the same time, Michael, if you'll go to the next one, they have these tremendous attributes. Now, I'll say at the very beginning, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. These are very general strengths. Not everybody has these, but if you look through these different circles, these are unbelievable qualities that any 21st century organization would just be thrilled to have. And I really also want to kind of focus on that bottom left-hand corner, the honest, tenacious, loyal, reliable. I work with individuals. I have one young man who works with us. He rides his bike to a bus stop and then takes 2 buses carrying his bike with him to get to work. Never been on time, never been late, never missed a day. And we live in a snow belt. But talk about just the abilities to focus and the attention to detail, et cetera. So tremendous capabilities that are being underutilized and overlooked. If you'll go to the next slide for me, Michael.
Could I add something about honest,
Sure,
tenacious, and reliable?
Sure.
So just to speak to that point, I had said that we recognize exceptional cognitive abilities in society, and that's true. Those abilities are often publicly recognized. But I'm a trustee of an institution called the Big E, which is the 6th largest state fair in North America. We draw almost 2 million people through our gates in a typical non-COVID year. And we have a very large staff of people to manage the fair, over 1,000 people working on the grounds. We have a number of people who have significant developmental disabilities. And among those people are what I would say some of our most honest, tenacious, loyal, and reliable workers. These are people who tend the flowers, who collect the tickets, who sort funds and things, and who deliver materials between exhibitors. They do all of these foundational tasks without which we could not run the fair. They are proud to be part of the team. They are not there as people with neurological differences. They are there as workers, period. They're part of us. But those neurological differences, I would argue, give them those attributes which make them very, very valuable workers for us. And that's true elsewhere if you give people with differences a chance.
Hugely, John. And the folks that I work with are data analysts, software developers, et cetera. And exactly the same thing. If you give them a chance and you give them the proper accommodations and supports, they can go to unbelievable heights, and you will be astounded by their accomplishments. Michael, if you'll go to the next slide for me. So again, kind of this ties on to what John was talking about before. There's a misperception quite often from employers that there's going to be burdensome accommodations, they'll be costly, they'll be labor intensive, which is really not the case. And that a lot of the problems too is many neurodiverse individuals either don't want to or just they don't self-identify. So sometimes the employers may not be aware that they need the accommodations. Many folks that are in the working environment with autism, if they don't want to self-identify, they try very hard to do social masking and camouflaging, forcing themselves to make eye contact, trying to kind of be that person that they thought they were supposed to be, which can often lead to burnout. If you can imagine spending your whole day, every day, trying to be, to fit into something that you're not, you can imagine how exhausting that would be at the end of each day. And again, as we've already touched on before, almost everyone under that ASD umbrella will often have some additional diagnosis. I see a lot of anxiety and depression, a lot of ADHD, and again, a lot of OCD as well. You could go to the next slide. So what we're trying to do today for you was some challenges, but also some strategies. So some common accommodations for neurodiverse after hiring. One thing, under the ADA, there needs to be reasonable accommodations. And some of those accommodations are very, very simple, allowing the person to wear noise canceling headphones or purchasing noise canceling headphones for them. Providing indirect lighting, fluorescent lighting can be incredibly difficult for people on the spectrum. I know for me, at the end of the day, I often work in fluorescent lighting, and produces headaches, etc. Assigned seating so that they know exactly where they're going to be, that structure and routine within it, if there's an open floor plan, so that every day they don't have to make that decision of what cubicle am I going to or where I'm supposed to be. Having an identified space or items for decompression. We have some sensory rooms in our offices that have everything from the fiddle pieces, puzzles, but we also have rooms that it's literally just a quiet room, indirect lighting, so that if somebody needs to just walk away for a bit and decompress, that they have that opportunity.
Can I add something here too?
Sure.
When we look at these accommodations that you're describing, all of which are very reasonable, it's easy for employers to look at these things and say, oh, that's not that big a burden. I could do that for him or for her. But in fact, if you think about these things, do you want to work in a windowless concrete room with overhead fluorescent lights? Everyone would rather be in a building with indirect lighting. Everyone would rather have a quiet workspace where they don't need noise canceling headphones because there's not a clamor. Everyone would like to be in an open floor plan. Everyone would like a space to walk to cool off and settle down occasionally. Every single worker wants that. The difference with neurodivergent people is that we say, without those accommodations, we can't work. But every single person benefits from these kinds of changes. They are not accommodations for us. They are enhancements to a workplace to make it better for everyone, that are driven by our identification of the need.
Absolutely. So again, it's one of those things where, John, it's where having these accommodations, to your point, enhances the abilities of everybody to be more productive. But it's only because neurodiverse people require them or request them that sometimes these even happen. So, and then again, some silly things like, not silly, but letting people attend a meeting virtually instead of having to be there in person, which now with COVID, we've all become so used to anyway. And then a lot of visual supports, checklists, notes, reminders, very, very critical, and very, the idea about everything being very explicit, et cetera. One thing the next slide exactly, that's fine, great. The next tends to fall into 4 general areas that I have found with the employment model, which is communication skills, social skills, time management, and adapting to change. So if you go to the next slide, Michael, so some things about communication skills, challenges, and strategies. You can click again and you'll get some challenges up there. So some communication challenges, expressive language, really making sure. Many folks on the spectrum have a difficult time articulating their own needs, wants, preferences, problems. They may get fixated on a favorite topic. I work with a lot of 20-somethings on the spectrum, and they will often want to have if you want to get them talking, ask them about their favorite collection or their favorite video game, or are they a Star Wars or a Star Trek person, etc. But they tend to be very, very focused on sometimes deep dives into specific topics. Sometimes volume, tone, and pronunciation can be a little bit off. So they may speak a little bit more loudly or a little softly than your neurotypical individual, or their tone may be flatter, or their pronunciation may be slightly stilted. And also their answers can be very short, as opposed to sort of long-winded like I'm speaking right now. Receptive language, that whole concept of trying to take things in, taking it all in. One thing that I have had to get much better about in my workings is being very, very literal. One of the things that I do in one of my assessment classes is we do an icebreaker, and I never thought a thing of it because I've done icebreakers my whole life. And a person turned to me and said, "Are we breaking ice this morning?" And I said, "Oh no, we're just going to get to know one another, and that's breaking the ice." And it's like, well, no, it means you break ice. And it's like, got it. I just wrote down, learning the ropes, showing somebody the ropes. If I was someone on the spectrum, I might honestly say, why do I need to know about ropes if I'm doing a data analyst position? So again, making sure that your language is clear and explicit, et cetera. And instead of verbal, can you use devices, pictures, making sure that it's very, very clear. And lots of times modeling is incredibly helpful. If you cook again, you'll see some strategies. So again, speaking with the person and finding out how do they want to be interacted with. Do they prefer text? Do they prefer emails, et cetera? Try to not talk quite as rapidly. That's just something, again, difficult for me. I'm an East Coaster, and I tend to talk sometimes a little too fast. Also using fewer words and being very literal and very concrete. And then again, using visual supports to illustrate any kind of verbal communications that you're doing. So some possible strategies: providing, if you're going to have a business meeting, provide advance notice of what's going to be discussed so that they can be prepared to possibly participate in the conversation. Give advance notice of the date so that there's no anxiety around, oh my gosh, a pop quiz is not a great idea for somebody with autism spectrum disorder. It produces tremendous anxiety that they're not prepared, that they might be caught off guard. And then providing them the opportunity to provide electronic responses or written responses in terms, as opposed to having to do verbal responses. Anything in there, John, that you'd like to add to that?
Yes. May I suggest, with all due respect, that we should not be speaking of any employees as employees with autism spectrum disorder, because I think you would be hard pressed to find a single employee in any workplace in America who would characterize themselves as disordered. I think that it's fair to say we have autistic workers and they've made certain requests, or we have some workers that have specific support needs. But I think to characterize someone as disordered sets the stage for diminished expectations. It makes listeners subconsciously think, well, that person's disordered. What's he going to be able to do for us anyway? And I think that
I didn't mean that. I usually tend to default really to neurodiverse. That's the phrase I use 95% of the time, is just talking about neurodiverse employees.
Autism spectrum disorder is a very pernicious thing. It has really worked itself into the language of special ed teachers and school psychologists. It's something that it absolutely has its place. There is a significant neurological disorder which some people can fairly be diagnosed with. But I don't think it's right to characterize those people in conversation as disordered outside of the doctor's office.
Can I jump in on a slightly different point? I was just struck by some of the strategies that you're proposing, Janet, about, for example, having clear meeting agendas. This reminds me so much of the work that we do on campus to try to encourage faculty to have crystal clear, very organized syllabi, which, just like you're describing here, and just as John was describing kind of best practices, so helpful for every student, but absolutely crucial for some students. I'm really struck by the parallel between the kinds of things we're talking about with pedagogy in higher education, and in fact, K through 16 really, and what's useful in the workplace. The same kinds of making things explicit, keeping things organized.
And I think with that, Karin, too, what we found in the workforce is that if someone is not succeeding, if we have a neurodiverse employee who's not doing well, the first thing to look at is what processes have we been using to onboard them. Quite often it means we've skipped a step, or we haven't been utilizing screenshots the way we should, and really walking them through the step by step of the process, that inherently there may be some gaps. That it's like, well, you do A and then you do C, and not thinking that for some people, maybe they can jump from A to C or A to D, but really the need to do breadcrumb to breadcrumb to breadcrumb. So A to B to C to D, to truly lay that out, because they're very pragmatic and logical thinkers quite often.
One of the things that we found in some of our presentations on campus, John, you'll tell me if I'm wrong about this, but one of the things we found most effective is just trying to clarify for faculty and staff just what their own perhaps unrecognized expectations are. So just like that point about look me in the eye, the expectation is someone will pay attention if they're looking you in the eye, rather than understanding actually they're not. But lots of expectations that way, that we have expectations that people will interact in a certain way. And if we can recognize what our expectations are, sometimes we understand that those expectations are not necessarily productive or necessary. And I'm wondering, Janet, if you find that in working with employers, helping them to recognize what their own expectations are and where those expectations are important ones and where those are ones they can kind of let go of.
Yeah, I mean, there's silly things. Some organizations have the culture, Friday night after work, everybody goes out for a beer. Most individuals, neurodiverse individuals, that's their worst nightmare. It's loud, it's noisy, a lot of people, they might be expected to talk to others. Many of the people that I interact with aren't even drinkers. They think it's expensive and why would I waste my time? So often that's one social expectation that, and same thing even with lunches, it's like, oh, let's have a team lunch, or we'll do a team building exercise. Again, if you're a neurotypical person, if you're an introvert, you may not be happy anyway. But for someone who is neurodiverse, that could be incredibly painful and debilitating. And so to kind of look through those social expectations, those cultural norms that many of our organizations just don't even think about. We just take it for granted.
So one thing that I'd like to offer everyone to think about is that in the vein of explicit guidance for behavior, we have this evolving movement on college campuses and in workplaces of no means no, and one must give explicit consent for romantic or sexual relations, and that's a real big thing in colleges. And one of the criticisms of that movement is people rightly say, what's the matter here? Why are we suddenly going to have to bargain? Are we going to have sex? Are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? And I think that misses the point. I think the point is that if we were more explicit about everything that we did at school and in life, we would have a lot less trouble. And I think that if we approached that issue of being clear and offering clear guidance and obtaining clear consent far beyond romance, that would be hugely beneficial, not only to college students, but to millions of people in workplaces who could receive the benefit of clear, unambiguous guidance. And I believe if we did that as a more societal change, that would go a long way to constructively solving the no means no and consent issues that appear constantly in the news.
Super interesting perspective, John. I think, I always say that my takeaway, this is because I'm a simple person, but my takeaway from so many of our conversations about neurodiversity are that the more we can be introspective about what is the implicit and try to make it explicit. And if we're not comfortable making that implicit thing explicit, that means that thing was never okay to begin with. So And I think that's part of what you're addressing here, John. I wondered, Lisa has a very specific question, John, about person first language. I know you've sort of addressed this already, but I wondered if you could just go straight at that. And Lisa's point is that sometimes adults on the spectrum do not prefer person first language. So autistic adults versus adults on the spectrum, for example. So can you talk about that? Person first versus autistic first?
SAP is one of the leaders in running autism and neurodiversity at work programs in North America and indeed all over the world. Mm-hmm. In North America, we had that question. Jose Velasco, who leads the North American program, actually polled the autistic interns in the Autism at Work program, and there was not a clear answer. A significant number of people said, well, there are people with autism, and a significant number said we are autistic people. I often suggest to folks that parents generally come to autism when a psychologist says, well, sir, well, ma'am, your child has autism. And they say, I have a child with autism. And the child hears that he or she has autism. But as the child gets older and looks online in autism communities like Wrong Planet and these emergent Facebook groups and groups elsewhere on social media, the predominant conversational term there is autistic adult. So I think that it's probably fair to say that a large fraction, if not a majority, start as children with autism and grow into teens or adults, autistic teens or adults. And also I think that we can say, I have autism if I was explaining a behavioral challenge. If I don't understand what you're saying, I might say, well, I have autism, and part of that is I have a communication disability, so I can't, tell that about you. But if you were asking, well, why was I successful in engineering? I would say, because I'm autistic, I had a way of seeing patterns and waves that many other people couldn't see, and that helped me. So I guess it's very much a contextual thing. There is no single blanket answer.
Great.
I would also jump in just because I deal with this every day, because I think, again, it circles back to, if you've met one autistic individual, you've met one autistic individual, or one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism. Every week I have somebody say to me, I would prefer to be referred to as an individual with autism. And then the very next day, somebody will say, please refer to me as an autistic individual. So it's sort of, again, it's some of its personal choice as well.
And I think it's up to us to decide what we're called. There's no, it's not a therapist or teacher's place to say you are a child with autism or you are an autistic adult. It's in fact, just as we can say, I identify as gay, I identify as whatever, I identify as a person with autism or as autistic.
Well, and again, I think just to your point, John, this really is almost the umbrella of this whole thing, is that, trying to recognize, meet the person where they are and say, how would you like to be referred to? What accommodations would you need, or would you like to have, to be as productive as possible and to feel as most included and belonging as possible? And I think, it's that old kind of adage, there's the old golden rule, that do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And I've always said, well, that's fine, but I like the platinum rule better, which is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. And I always use the adage that if I'm buying everybody ice cream, if I'm doing the golden rule, I'll buy you all my favorite flavor, because that's what I would do unto you. But if I'm doing the platinum rule, I would ask each one of you what your favorite flavor is and get that for you. So I think that's what I think with working with neurodiverse folks is using the platinum rule.
I love that. And it's mint chip. by the way, Janet, definitely.
Okay,
always
great, no
mention.
problem. I'd have bought you butter pecan. See, that's the problem. That's the issue.
Excellent. I think respect for the individual is really key here. Could we talk a little bit about ways that we could be thinking at William and Mary, particularly in the Neurodiversity Initiative, but also as we try to take all of our work across campus, that we could help our neurodiverse students as they move towards employment. And Janet, I want to start with you again, because this really is your area of immediate experience, and then go to John, who's worked a lot with our students.
Great. Bottom line, in some ways, is helping them learn how to self-advocate. Again, being able to, when you're going into your even being able to say to a recruiter or whatever, face-to-face conversation, I will not show my best. If you could give me some written prompts, that would be helpful. Could I have an opportunity to show you my technical skills and competencies? Because traditional job interviews focus on interpersonal competencies, not what your technical abilities are. It's always fascinating to me that you're hiring an accountant and you don't ask them to show you their a balance sheet and have them work through that. It's almost always sort of, well, Karin, tell me about yourself, and I see you got an accounting degree. So it's interesting to me that if we could kind of reverse the paradigm and focus on what is the job requirement, and therefore help the student be able to self-advocate for themselves, that this is what I bring to the table for this job. And these are the technical competencies that support that. But, having just a one-on-one conversation with a person is not going to give them what they need in that regard. So that self-advocacy is one huge piece. But if you can't get around that, because we are in the world that we are, doing some mock interviews and helping them find ways to, there are ways that we talk about too, about, if you can't maintain the eye contact, make briefly and then drop. Or look right above them so that you're not really looking them in their eye, but they think you are, you're really looking over their head. So we do a lot of different strategies to help them, unfortunately, play the game, if you will, because unfortunately the world isn't changing as rapidly as we would like it to. But those are a couple of strategies I would suggest.
That's so interesting.
Think it's also.
Oh, I was just going to say something really quick, John, about that great comment that Garrett Westlake always makes, who's now at VCU, but who we've talked with a lot in the course of our neurodiversity work, where he goes into a company and he says, I promise you that your best workers are not the people who are rushing out here to hand me their business card. They're the people who are too busy to come out here and give me their business card and shake my hand. Anyway, but again, that goes back to these expectations and what's behind these expectations, and understanding our own expectations sometimes as neurotypical people may be just as important. Sorry, John.
I think that every student at William and Mary should give thought to what is their identity. Is their identity that they are a star athlete? Are they a math genius? Are they a proud African American? Or there are innumerable attributes that one could say define each of us. And if part of what defines you is your neurological diversity, and that will define you if you, for example, struggled in special ed in school, if you had a hard time getting to a college like William and Mary because your neurological differences made it hard for you to do the things necessary to gain admission. So if that's a part of you and how you see yourself, I think that, as with all those other attributes, you would be wise to seek an employer who values those things that are central to you. And just as there are corporations where a marketing major can find potential bosses who absolutely love it that he played football for William and Mary, and that's a strong plus for him, there are employers who want you because of your neurodiversity. And now that neurodiversity is becoming a thing, more and more corporations have neurodiversity at work initiatives, and they are seeking people who are different. And if you are the thing that they are seeking, you should try and find such an employer. I also think that employers are going to lay this back on colleges. They're going to say, we want to hire neurodivergent graduates of yours who are going to be good workers in all sorts of areas. SAP, I told you, is one of the largest programs in the world right now. But SAP has a hard time hiring 100 graduates in all of North America every year. And I think they're right to say, come on, colleges, find me those people. Find me 1,000 applicants, not 100. And that means that admission people in colleges have to ask themselves, how do we maintain our standards of academic excellence in deciding who to admit while also admitting people whose neurological differences might prevent them from scoring highly on our traditional measures, given the pressure of employers for us to bring in and cultivate those people.
I think we've got time for just one more kind of topic here. I wanted to just bring us back to the strengths. That is, every individual is individual, right? Everybody has a combination of strengths and challenges, and we never want to overlook the real fact of disability here, which requires support, be it extreme or not, and it's often differential in this circumstance. But let's talk a little bit about some of those strengths again of neurodiverse employees and professionals. I thought it might be helpful to end on that note. I know Janet's slide addressed that, but John, do you think you can start that piece and talk a little bit again about where you think real strengths are?
Well, I think that our strengths exist on all levels. I think that we have basic human traits like kindness and innocence and reliability and loyalty. And those are valuable in all kinds of jobs. But there are many, many people who do jobs that we don't necessarily associate with being a college graduate. Like in my time at the National Institutes of Health, we had a program called Project Search in the NIH Clinical Center, which is the largest single point hospital in the world. And we brought in young men and women, mostly with autism and many with intellectual disability diagnoses. These were people who were described as profoundly disabled. Many could not speak well enough to have a conversation. They were thought by their parents to not be able to ever work and live independently. And we assigned them coaches and we set them to work doing things like refilling hand sanitizers. And you might think, how big a deal can it be refilling hand sanitizers? Well, at that clinical center, we have thousands of hand sanitizers. It's a big deal. And so we had this little army of people who did these things, and they did it successfully, and they were so proud to graduate from being Project Search interns to being regular federal employees. They are not federal employees with disability accommodations. They are part of the team. And just as you see neurodiversity at that end of the cognitive range, you see neurodiversity in the brightest stars, in the creative arts, in writing music, or in the performing arts. People like Anthony Hopkins on stage, and you see brilliant people in designing technology. But those companies, those technology companies, also have neurodivergent people driving the trucks, taking care of the properties, doing all sorts of other things. And so our place is everywhere.
Yeah, I just want to jump in as well to say this is also it's ROI for businesses. I mean, these organizations, these corporations, this is great ROI. One of our clients is a major power company, and the first group of neurodiverse individuals we employed, we put on a team for them, and they allotted 18 months for this team to get the job done. The team accomplished it in 5 months. So that's 13 months early. For those of you who are in corporate America, do the math. Now that team started with 4 people. We have over 32 people on that team now because it's ROI. The bottom line is neurodiverse individuals deliver. They deliver tremendous productivity and value to any organization that they're in.
And these
Thank you both. So, John, I'm going to have
programs make us better. They make all of us better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. I love that. So I think I need to hand this back over to Michael to close us out here. But I like John's last point. These programs make us all better. Love that. Underscore.
I could listen to the three of you go for another 5 hours. Unfortunately, I'm sure people have dinner times to meet and other things to take care of. But John, amazing. Janet, amazing. Karin, amazing. Thank you so much for the honesty, as many people said, that discussing so much in an hour on this topic that I know is important to each of you personally and professionally, and one that I hope that we continue. And I hope and encourage all of you attending or watching the recording to reach out to Karin, get more engaged in our neurodiversity initiatives at William & Mary that she mentioned. Reach out to Janet and learn more about her nonprofit that she's leading and doing great work with companies around the country, and get to follow John and his amazing advocacy and work that he's doing, both his writing and also fascinating career path that he has taken, and all that he's leading in our neurodiverse community advocacy work. I just want to say thank you to an amazing day. I personally learned so much today as a professional. I feel, it's amazing that William & Mary's community has so many brilliant minds to share so much knowledge. And I know there's thousands of more of you out there to help get engaged. So I hope we continue programming, not just in 1 week, we continue this throughout the year, sharing our expertise, thanking each other, supporting each other, learning from each other is key. And so I've ended every event by encouraging you to take the chance this week to post on social media somebody that has influenced you and made a difference in your career from the William & Mary community, whether it was a faculty member, a fellow classmate, an alumna or alumnus, or mentored you, or just opened a door for you at a company, or a partner, a business partner, a client, you name it. Just say thank you, and we will be following this on social for the rest of the week and want to share it and wider to the wider community. But I want to just say thank you again. Janet wears many hats for William & Mary, has been involved in many areas, but it's so nice to also see your professional expertise in not just the volunteer, keeping our foundation forward thinking and so forth. And it wouldn't be, I have to mention that I started this pandemic experience with my first webinar being with Peter Atwater, Janet's husband and other champion of William & Mary, and how apropos that now Janet is here a year later helping lead a very important topic. So thank you for that. And Karin and John, thank you both. With that, enjoy your evenings. Tomorrow we have a session at noon. For those of you that want to look at your career mindset and vision and answer some difficult thinking certain questions, not just about title and salary, but really dive into a great session Pam Krulitz will be leading. And then on Friday, we'll be celebrating our professional networks. It's a great open networking opportunity. We'll be using a new technology called Gatherly, which is video chats and you kind of move around. It's really cool. I've taken a preview of it. We tested it out this morning. It's really awesome. I want to hear how you think, what you think about it. And also, I think you'll get to meet some great individuals. So with that, I'm going to let everyone enjoy your evening. Any final words, Karin? Or John or anybody?
I put the William & Mary Neurodiversity URL in the chat. So, reach out to us anytime. And just thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And you'll get a survey when you chime off today. If you could just answer that real quickly, that would be terrific. And enjoy your evenings. Stay well, everyone.
Everybody, it was wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.